Have you ever seen a painting that seems to open an abyss beneath your feet, as if it were inviting you to look straight into the darkest side of human existence? A work that not only represents a biblical moment, but a spiritual fall that we have all felt at some point. In the vast history of art, there are paintings that illuminate, but there are also others that shake you. And among them, one of the most impactful canvases of English Romanticism shines with a somber glow. Its title is Satan Summoning His Legions, and behind its apocalyptic aura lies a story of rebellion, ambition, tragedy, and symbolism that few have explored with true depth. At first glance, the work looks more like a feverish dream than a pictorial scene. A colossal figure rises over a stony throne, surrounded by a sea of shadows that stir like an army of fallen souls. The sky is torn by a reddish light that seems to come from the very interior of the earth, as if the world had been split in half and were letting escape the fire that fuels eternal rebellion. But this painting was not born from whim or gratuitous fantasy. It was born from the tormented and visionary spirit of an artist who set out to show what Victorian society most feared to admit, that chaos and darkness are also part of the human experience. John Martin, its creator, was a painter who never conformed to the margins of normality. Born in England in the year 1789, he grew up in a humble family, far from the luxuries and comforts enjoyed by the great names of European art. From childhood, he felt an almost supernatural fascination for ruins, cliffs, storms, catastrophes, and anything that revealed the fragility of the human being in the face of the universe. He did not seek to paint portraits or domestic scenes. He wanted to capture the colossal, the epic, the indescribable. That obsession led him to create a unique style that moved away from academic canons and brought him closer to theater, myth, and the apocalypse itself. When he began working on Satan Summoning His Legions, he was already burdened with the reputation of being a controversial artist, loved by the public and criticized by the cultural elite. His gigantic canvases, full of violent lights and impossible perspectives, were considered too sensationalist by some, while others saw him as a visual prophet capable of translating into images the collective fear of an era marked by revolutions, fires, religious crises, and technological changes that seemed to announce the end of a known world. In that period, Martin was deeply inspired by Paradise Lost, the monumental poem written by John Milton in the 17th century. That literary work portrays the rebellion of Lucifer in such a human, tragic, and poetic way that it completely captivated the painter. He was not interested in showing a grotesque, deformed demon, but a fallen leader, powerful, seductive, and capable of awakening both admiration and terror at the same time. Thus was born the central figure of the painting, a representation of Satan who is not a monster, but a symbol of overflowing will, absolute rebellion, and ambition that refuses to die even after having been expelled from heaven. The composition is so theatrical that many experts believe Martin conceived it as a cinematic scene before cinema existed. Everything points toward the figure of the fallen angel, the lines of the terrain, the curvature of the abyss, the rows of infernal soldiers that vanish into the distance, the fire that bursts forth as if responding to his call. The light does not come from the sky, but from the depths of the earth, a detail that symbolizes the radical turn of the story. Divine light has been replaced by the illumination of rebellion, a glow born from wounded pride. Few know that this work was surrounded by controversy from the moment of its creation. In a deeply religious society, representing Satan not as an absolute enemy, but as a tragic and almost heroic figure, was considered an act of provocation. Many critics of the time accused Martin of glorifying evil, of breaking the moral limits of art, and of awakening sympathy for the rebel expelled from heaven. That scandal contributed to the painting's fame, but it also turned it into a misunderstood piece for decades, relegated by some collectors who feared that its presence would attract misfortune, tragedy, or spiritual unrest into the home. However, beyond prejudice, Martin achieved something incredible. He turned an epic passage into a visual reflection on the human condition. Satan appears as a leader, but also as a victim of his own greatness. He is a symbol of the decisions we make when we feel that the world denies us a place. The mass of figures surrounding him is not just an army, it is a multitude of beings who follow the one who dares, even when that daring leads them to an uncertain destiny. There are details that go unnoticed at first glance, but reveal the spiritual depth of the painting. For example, Satan's wings are raised in a majestic way, as if he refused to accept his fall. The position of his arm points toward a dark horizon, a gesture that symbolizes a call to action, an invitation to rebel against any form of authority. The silhouettes around him are painted with a clear intention. They seem small, insignificant compared to his figure, which further highlights his power, his magnetism, and his capacity to influence others. For many years it was believed that this painting had disappeared, that it had been lost among fires, wars, and poorly recorded auctions. That mystery increased its legend, making it a work sought after by historians and collectors. It was finally recovered in the 20th century, though not without damage. It showed deep cracks, areas darkened by time, and details almost erased by humidity and handling. Its restoration was a slow and meticulous process, carried out by experts who had to reconstruct entire zones based on infrared studies, sketches, and comparisons with other works by Martin himself. That restoration not only brought back the infernal red glow that characterizes the work, but also revealed hidden layers that the public had never seen. Among them, the presence of small figures in the background, almost invisible, that represent wandering souls walking without direction, a silent symbol of eternal damnation. It was also discovered that Martin applied a kind of experimental varnish that intensified contrasts, but which over time became dark and opaque, hiding the original drama of the scene. Restoring that play of lights was essential to recover the apocalyptic spirit that the artist sought to convey. The interpretation of the work has changed with the passage of time. If in the 19th century it provoked fear and scandal for its demonic content, today it is understood as a reflection on power, ambition, and downfall. Many see in Satan a symbol of the figure who rebels against the system, of one who does not tolerate humiliation, of one who prefers to burn rather than submit. Others consider him a representation of charismatic leaders who drag masses toward uncertain destinies, incarnations of unbridled pride that can set entire nations on fire. But the truth is that this painting forces us to look within ourselves. We all have a moment in life when we feel the temptation of rebellion, pride, defiance. We have all at some point stood before the ruins of our decisions, summoning our own legions of fears, desires, and resentments. John Martin did not paint a demon to frighten us. He painted a fallen angel to remind us that light can turn into shadow, and that shadow can acquire a power so seductive that it is hard to resist. But if there is something that sets the Arnolfini portrait apart from any other work of its time, it is the sensation of silence that emanates from it. It is not an empty silence. It is a dense, almost ceremonial silence, as if we were witnessing a rite without words, without a visible priest, without recognizable witnesses beyond those two figures reflected in the mirror. It is a silence that resonates. It is the kind of silence that accompanies the moments that change life, those in which the everyday becomes transcendent. And that ability to transform a private scene into something universal is perhaps Jan van Eyck's greatest achievement. To understand it, we must remember that in the 15th century domestic interiors were rarely considered worthy of an official portrait. Artists used to depict saints, biblical scenes, battles, or formal portraits in neutral spaces. But here, Van Eyck does exactly the opposite. He dignifies an apparently ordinary room, turning it into the setting of an almost religious solemnity. Every object tells a story. Every texture is a symbol. Every gesture seems choreographed by a deeper meaning. Nothing is casual. Nothing is superfluous. And above all, nothing is what it seems. The mirror, for example, not only shows what is happening behind us, it also shows what we are incapable of seeing. Its convex shape recalls a human eye, or even a divine eye, that encompasses more than any earthly gaze could. It is a reminder that this act, whether a marriage contract, an economic pact, or a funerary homage, is not being witnessed only by the living, but also by a superior gaze. The mirror turns the scene, in a way, into a parable. Nothing escapes judgment, nothing is lost, nothing is left outside eternal memory. This play between presence and absence, between life and death, is present throughout the composition. The lit candle, whose flame seems motionless, points to the fragility of existence. Nothing burns forever, everything flickers. Whether the woman is or is not pregnant, alive or not at the moment of the portrait, is secondary compared to the broader message. Human life is a delicate balance between what endures and what is extinguished. That balance can also be seen in the colors. The intense green of the dress speaks of life, growth, hope. The deep red of the bed speaks of passion, of vital energy, but also of vulnerability and pain. The black of the man's attire marks solemnity, commitment, gravity. The scene is an emotional map encoded in fabrics and pigments. Historians have discussed for centuries whether the woman is truly pregnant. Today we know she is not, but it is revealing that entire generations insisted on it. That insistence shows something important. The painting invites us to think about continuity, fertility, the life that is to come. Whether it was literal or symbolic does not matter. Van Eyck makes us think about the possibility of a birth, and that thought activates a universal emotion, the idea of the future. On the other hand, the position of the hands, he holding hers, she receiving it without force but without insecurity, seems to convey an alliance, but an alliance that is not romantic in the modern sense. In the 15th century, marriage was an economic and spiritual contract, a pact that ordered social life. Van Eyck portrays that pact without idealizing it, but also without stripping it of affection. We do not see smiles, we do not see exaggerated gestures of tenderness, we see instead a solemnity that could be interpreted as mutual respect, a union not based on passion, but on shared responsibility. Light plays a leading role here. It enters from the left, soft but firm, illuminating especially the man's face and the hand he holds. This light not only models the space, it seems to act as a moral guide. In Flemish painting, light was often associated with truth, with revelation. It is as if Van Eyck were hinting that what happens in that room, that union, that agreement, that right, must be illuminated and seen, not hidden. The transparency of the oil allows the light to penetrate the layers of paint and reflect outward, creating a luminosity that remains alive centuries later. And what can we say about the dog, that small creature that seems insignificant but holds a huge symbol? Dogs, in medieval iconography, represent absolute fidelity, loyalty unto death. That it is situated right in the lower center of the painting, between the two spouses, reinforces the idea of commitment. Its gaze directed toward us could be interpreted in two ways, as proof that the couple has a silent witness, or as an invitation to us, the viewers, to assume the role of arbiters of that union. The fruits, carefully placed on the sideboard, are not simple decorations either. In a religious context, oranges and apples could represent innocence before original sin, or even divine grace. In an economic context, they were symbols of luxury, of wealth. Their presence reminds us that the couple belongs to a high class, but also that their union is surrounded by moral expectations. In the 15th century, any home that displayed exotic fruits was demonstrating commercial connections, prosperity, and social status. The bed, enormous and dominant, is one of the most commented elements of the painting. It represents the heart of domestic life. There one is born, falls ill, is conceived, dies. In many Flemish homes of the time, the bed was not a hidden piece of furniture, but a visible symbol of the cycle of life. That the artist includes it so clearly suggests that the scene is linked to the rites of human existence, birth, union, continuity. The red color, intense and almost vibrating, adds yet another layer of meaning. It is a color associated with love, but also with sacrifice, a color that announces both joy and pain. The objects hanging on the wall, the rosary, the brush, speak to us of roles and devotions. The rosary alludes to spirituality, prayer, inner discipline. The brush, in contrast, refers to practical life, to maintaining the home, to constant and silent work. Together they form a kind of visual motto: work and pray, balance between body and spirit, between the material and the transcendent. It is a reminder that a well-ordered life needs both. The presence of Saint Margaret, carved on the bed, adds a protective touch. She was the patron saint of pregnant women, a symbol of strength and hope in difficult childbirths. Her figure connects directly with the desire for offspring and with the idea of divine protection over the home. It is no coincidence that this small sculpture is just behind the woman, symbolically accompanying her. The mirror, as geometric and spiritual center, does not only reflect, it introduces into the painting something that no other 15th century work had dared to show in this way. It introduces the notion that the viewer is part of the scene. It introduces the idea that if we look, we are also being looked at. The mirror is loaded with moral symbolism. It is the mirror of conscience, of memory, of judgment. But it is also a technical marvel. Its reflection shows details that are outside the frame, expanding the space and reminding us that reality is always broader than what a direct gaze can reach. This sensation of double observation, we looking at the painting and the painting looking at us, creates a unique relationship between work and viewer. This effect is intensified thanks to the signature "Jan van Eyck was here." This phrase turns the artist into a character. He is not just a distant creator, he is a direct witness of the event. This boldness, signing as if he had physically taken part, is one of the most fascinating gestures in the history of art. It suggests an intimate relationship between the painter and the scene, as if he himself had been present at that crucial moment. It is both an affirmation of authorship and a declaration of existence. The artist says, "I saw this," and with that phrase he loads the scene with truth, even if we do not know exactly what that this was. The journey of the painting through history also adds additional layers of meaning, from Burgundian palaces to the collections of princes and nobles, and finally to a modern museum. The Arnolfini portrait has been continually reinterpreted. In each era, a different concern has been projected onto it: Christian marriage, mercantile luxury, death, the role of the woman, religious symbolism, economic pact, bourgeois domesticity. It is a cultural mirror where each century recognizes itself in its own way. The conservation of the work has been exceptional, partly because of the quality of the oak, partly because of the finesse of the technique, and partly because of its historical value. Cleanings carried out revealed bright colors that were hidden under darkened varnishes. The light regained its purity, the green began to breathe again, the red recovered its intensity, the metals resumed their shine. It is as if the work had been reborn, giving back to the world the clarity with which Van Eyck conceived it. Today, when millions of people contemplate it every year, the painting continues to offer more questions than answers, and perhaps that is its secret. It does not explain, it hints. It does not impose a meaning, it suggests one. It does not close, it opens doors. The gaze of the viewer becomes part of the work, because the painting demands interpretation, demands participation. It demands that one ask oneself what one is really seeing: a marriage, a farewell, a testimony, a pact, a reminder of human fragility, a celebration of prosperity, a lament for what has been lost. Perhaps it is all that at once. The Arnolfini portrait is one of those rare moments in which art ceases to be a representation and becomes an experience that combines intimacy, mystery, symbolism, technique, history, and emotion. An experience that reminds us that human beings in any era fill our rooms and our gestures with meanings we are sometimes not even aware we are leaving behind. The dog is still there. The candle is still burning. The mirror is still watching. The hand is still extended. The room is still waiting for an answer. And we, centuries later, are still entering that silent room, trying to decipher a secret that may never be completely solved. Because that is the nature of great enigmas. They are not explained, they are felt, and the Arnolfini portrait, rather than telling us a story, forces us to inhabit it.